The Imperial Japanese Army entered the Pacific War with a profound, almost spiritual belief in the superiority of its fighting doctrine, a philosophy that valued the tenacity of the individual soldier over the crushing weight of technology. This entire ethos was centered around the doctrine of the rifleman's lot. Their primary weapon, the Type 99 Arisaka bolt-action rifle, was a rugged, accurate weapon capable of holding 5 rounds. The Japanese soldier was trained to be stealthy, to infiltrate enemy lines under darkness, and to conserve every precious round of ammunition. Firepower was seen as a resource to be used judiciously, prioritizing accuracy and stealth over volume. Their entire tactical focus was built around generating rapid, effective fire, just long enough to secure a position or create a temporary distraction, leading up to the ultimate decisive maneuver. The bayonet charge. The low rate of fire imposed by the bolt-action rifle, roughly 10 to 12 aimed rounds per minute under ideal conditions, was not viewed as a weakness, but a component of discipline. This doctrine produced highly motivated, effective infantry capable of incredible feats of endurance and skill in the jungle terrain. However, the system was fatally optimized for an outdated style of warfare, one that assumed the enemy would fight by the same rules, pausing to reload, using cover conservatively, and respecting the lulls in combat. Japanese commanders had achieved phenomenal early success across Asia based on this very principle, leveraging speed, surprise, and the bayonet against often disorganized or technically inferior opponents. They had no strategic contingency for an enemy who viewed firepower not as a ration to be conserved, but as an overwhelming, endless resource to be expended at will. They were prepared for a knife fight in the dark, but their doctrine was about to be obliterated by a continuous, technologically generated wall of lead that defied every principle they held sacred. This reliance on the low firepower, high spirit doctrine was the tragic foundation that guaranteed the strategic shock to come. The first fragmented reports that filtered back to Japanese headquarters from the brutal, muddy crucible of Guadalcanal and later the bloody beaches of Tarawa were so far outside the realm of established doctrine that they were initially dismissed as the ravings of exhausted, shell-shocked survivors. Commanders like General Harukichi Hyakutake, who oversaw the operations on Guadalcanal, expected to hear reports of fierce skirmishes and bold bayonet charges, but the testimony he received spoke of something entirely new and terrifying. Never-ending fire, storms of bullets, and enemy soldiers who never seemed to reload. This was the first intelligence shock. The Japanese were accustomed to the cadence of the bolt-action rifle, a 5-round volley followed by a distinct pause, a moment for repositioning or mounting a charge. The American fire had no such rhythm. It was a continuous, sustained roar. Japanese intelligence officers, scrambling to make sense of the new reality, began a desperate calculation. They knew the specifications of the American M1 903 Springfield rifle, a bolt-action, similar to their Arisaka, but the field reports described a radically different primary weapon. When captured and observed, M1 Garands confirmed the semi-automatic 8-round clip system, the numbers quickly became horrifying. One American soldier could fire at least 4 times the rounds per minute of a Japanese soldier, but the true terror was the multiplication factor, when this capability was aggregated across a full U.S. Marine squad, and then across an entire division that had superior support weapons. The resulting volume of fire achieved a strategic multiplier that dwarfed anything in the Japanese arsenal. The official Japanese doctrine, built on the slow, methodical fire of the Arisaka, could not absorb the realization that their enemy possessed not marginally superior weapons, but firepower exponentially greater than their own. This initial, chilling quantification of the disparity, the dawning realization that they weren't facing a slightly better army, but a fundamentally different, industrialized form of warfare paralyzed the command structure, forcing them to accept that every subsequent engagement would be fought on an immediate, crushing deficit. The initial shock among Japanese commanders over the M1 Garand was only the beginning. The real horror lay in understanding the true 12x multiplier, the systemic advantage that extended far beyond the individual rifle. Japanese intelligence quickly realized the disparity wasn't a simple comparison of one semi-automatic rifle to one bolt-action rifle. It was the entire integrated structure of the U.S. Marine Squad. The 12x figure was a measurement of firepower density, the total volume of effective lead that could be directed at a target within a critical 60-second period. While the M1 Garand contributed a 3-to-1 advantage in rate of fire, the true multiplier came from U.S. supporting arms and doctrine. Every Marine squad was equipped with the Browning automatic rifle, a powerful, shoulder-fired automatic weapon that delivered sustained, heavy fire right at the infantry level, a capability the Japanese could only approximate with their slow-firing, often tripod-mounted light machine guns. This meant the U.S. squad could maintain a relentless, automatic baseline of fire that the Japanese could not match. Furthermore, the Americans had a massive advantage in specialized close combat tools, flamethrowers for clearing bunkers, massive quantities of fragmentation grenades, and dedicated rifle grenades, all integrated into the standard infantry team. The Japanese soldier, by contrast, relied almost entirely on his rifle and the limited support of a light machine gun at the platoon level. The 12x multiplier was therefore a comprehensive summation, the rapid semi-automatic fire of the M1 amplified by the suppressive automatic fire of the BAR, and rounded out by overwhelming explosive and chemical tools. This industrial application of firepower meant that when a U.S. squad opened fire, they delivered a sustained, continuous storm that was 12 times more effective at achieving immediate suppression and inflicting casualties than an equally sized Japanese squad. Relying on individual marksmanship and manual reloading, the most immediate and devastating tactical consequence of the 12x firepower multiplier was the impossibility of suppression for the Japanese forces. Japanese infantry doctrine, honed through years of combat in China and Asia, was predicated on stealth, utilizing cover, and delivering concentrated, high-accuracy volleys followed by rapid maneuver under the enemy's expected reload pause. Against the continuous stream of fire unleashed by the M1 Garand and the BAR, this entire tactical structure collapsed into irrelevance. The sheer density of American fire meant that Japanese soldiers could not perform the most fundamental battlefield actions. They could not lift their heads to aim. They could not crawl out of their positions to flank. And they certainly could not initiate the crucial, decisive phase of a Banzai charge. The moment a Japanese unit engaged, it was immediately pinned down under a continuous sheet of American lead that never ceased. Unlike the bolt-action era, where a small lapse in American fire provided a brief window for infiltration or counterattack, the M1 and BAR combination maintained such a relentless, focused barrage that any movement meant immediate exposure and certain death. Japanese soldiers were forced into a desperate, reactive mode, unable to achieve fire superiority or even parity. This paralysis led directly to rapidly escalating casualty rates as units found themselves suppressed to the point of immobility, unable to coordinate their efforts or execute their intended maneuvers. The tactical nightmare was complete. The tools and doctrine designed to ensure Japanese success, namely rapid infiltration and the aggressive close-quarters charge, were rendered obsolete by the sheer volume of metal delivered by the American squad. For the Japanese commanders, this represented a profound realization that their soldiers, no matter their courage, were being Systematically defeated by an industrial application of kinetic energy they simply could not match. For the Japanese command, the most profound and painful realization of the 12x firepower gap was the catastrophic failure of their signature offensive doctrine, the Banzai charge. This tactic was more than just a last-ditch assault. It was the ultimate expression of Bushido, designed to leverage speed, spiritual ferocity, and the predictable limitations of the enemy's bolt-action rifle. The entire strategic premise of the charge rested upon the guaranteed reload pause, the few seconds of silence after a 5-round volley where American soldiers would cycle their bolts or reload their magazines, providing the Japanese the window necessary to penetrate the line with bayonets and shock the enemy into retreat. The M1 Garand, however, combined with the ubiquitous presence of the BAR, completely eliminated that pause. When a squad of Marines, each firing 8 semi-automatic rounds as fast as they could pull the trigger, was augmented by the sustained automatic fire of the BAR, the result was not a volley followed by a silence, but a continuous, unrelenting wall of lead that could not be outrun or endured. The charge instantly became a suicidal sprint toward annihilation. Japanese commanders, reviewing the casualty reports from islands like Saipan and Guam, witnessed their most dedicated units being mown down en masse, often failing to close the distance before being utterly decimated. This was not a failure of morale or courage. It was the systematic technological defeat of a spiritual doctrine by industrialized kinetic energy. The Japanese High Command was forced to confront the demoralizing truth. Their most reliable offensive weapon was now a guaranteed means of mass sacrifice. The very heart of their infantry spirit was rendered impotent, forcing a rapid, humiliating shift away from offensive tactics and into static, deep defense, a move that fundamentally ceded the initiative and the ground war to the Marines. While the M1 Garand defined the rifle-level firepower gap, the true measure of the American divisional advantage and the secondary source of the 12x terror was the overwhelming heavy metal disparity in supporting arms. Japanese divisions often lacked standardized medium artillery, relying heavily on light field guns, captured ordnance, and direct fire weapons. U.S. Marine and Army divisions, conversely, arrived with staggering logistical depth. Every American battalion was supported by integrated 60mm and 81mm mortars capable of delivering accurate, high-explosive barrages on demand, suppressing enemy positions, or pinning down counterattacks with relentless efficiency. More critically, the U.S. ground forces operated in near-perfect coordination with massive offshore naval gunfire support and divisional artillery. A Japanese position that dared to show resistance might instantly be obliterated by 5-inch naval shells or sustained 105mm howitzer fire, a destructive capability the Japanese could simply never match. This massive difference in indirect fire capability meant that long before the infantry squads even closed for the rifle duel, Japanese fortifications, supply dumps, and assembly areas were already pulverized. The disparity was starkly visible in the field, where a Japanese platoon might have a single, light, Type 92 machine gun for support. The Americans had flamethrowers, vehicle-mounted heavy machine guns, and readily available demolition charges. The Japanese commanders understood this devastating reality. The 12x firepower multiplier wasn't just about their infantry being outgunned. It was about the entire division being outclassed, outranged, and outsupported by a system designed to deliver overwhelming, coordinated, destructive force across every square inch of the battlefield. The battle was often lost, not at the bayonet's point, but the moment the American division's supporting ordnance opened fire, guaranteeing the immediate destruction of any prepared defense. For Japanese commanders, the realization of the 12x firepower disparity evolved quickly from a tactical problem into a profound strategic catastrophe that invalidated their entire military philosophy. Their doctrine, steeped in the principles of Bushido, envisioned war as a series of rapid, decisive engagements, won through spiritual superiority and aggressive maneuver. The goal was to inflict a sharp, demoralizing defeat on the enemy, forcing a quick negotiated peace. The American response, powered by the seemingly infinite resources of its industrial base, was the immediate, unyielding imposition of a war of attrition, not spirit. Every Marine division that landed brought not only the terrifying volume of fire from its rifles and automatic weapons, but also the logistical tail necessary to sustain that fire indefinitely. Japanese forces were shocked to find that even after inflicting significant casualties, the American unit was instantly reinforced, resupplied, and ready to maintain the pressure. There was no pause, no respite, and no victory to be found in outlasting the enemy. The constant, massive consumption of ammunition by the U.S. forces, unthinkable under the Japanese supply paradigm, proved that the Americans did not need to conserve or outmaneuver. They simply needed to overwhelm. Commanders soon realized that any local tactical success achieved by their units, no matter how bravely fought, was meaningless against the relentless, systematic destruction wrought by the American logistical machine. The U.S. military could afford to trade 5 shells for every single Japanese soldier, and the Japanese could not afford to lose a single one. This recognition marked the absolute defeat of the Japanese strategic vision. The war was no longer about who possessed the stronger will, but who possessed the greater capacity to turn raw materials into high-explosive ordnance and machine gun rounds. The 12x firepower ratio was not just a battlefield statistic. It was a devastating economic indictment that proved the war was strategically lost the moment the two vastly different industrial systems clashed. The immediate, practical consequence of the 12x firepower disparity was the total abandonment of the Japanese Army's maneuver doctrine and the desperate shift towards the retreat to the cave. Facing a firepower volume they could not survive in the open, commanders determined that the only way to neutralize the M1 Garand semi-automatic fire and the BAR's automatic suppression was to deny the enemy a clear target. They abandoned traditional forward positions and embraced a strategy of static, deeply fortified defense, utilizing the natural terrain of the islands to construct elaborate networks of bunkers, concrete pillboxes, and interlocking tunnel systems carved into cliffs and hillsides. This defensive shift was a reluctant but necessary recognition that their infantry could no longer operate effectively outside of heavy cover. The goal was to force the Americans into costly, close-quarters siege warfare, where the U.S. firepower advantage would be somewhat mitigated, forcing the Marines to use infantry assaults, demolition, and flamethrowers instead of simply overwhelming them with bullets. While this tactic succeeded in slowing the American advance and drastically increasing U.S. casualties, it fundamentally surrendered all initiative. The Japanese were no longer fighting to win ground, but merely to inflict maximum pain before annihilation. The inherent flaw in this defensive posture was that while it stopped the rifle fire, it exposed the Japanese to the most fearsome specialized weapons the U.S. brought, including the potent combination of flamethrower tanks and demolition charges. Trapped in their subterranean networks, the Japanese became targets for combined arms operations designed specifically to breach and clear fortified spaces, sealing their troops inside their own elaborate tombs. This rigid defensive doctrine, born directly from the fear of the 12x firepower ratio, ultimately prolonged the war but guaranteed a systematic, painful defeat for the entrenched Japanese forces. The story of the 12x firepower ratio is, in its final analysis, the definitive chronicle of the defeat of doctrine, the moment where the Japanese military's reliance on spiritual superiority and the legacy of the bolt-action rifle was utterly and systematically crushed by the overwhelming reality. of American industrial might. This massive firepower disparity, initiated by the technological leap from the 5-round Arisaka to the 8-round semi-automatic M1 Garand, was immediately and devastatingly amplified by the ubiquitous presence of the Browning automatic rifle, BAR, ensuring every American squad could deliver a continuous stream of automatic fire that the Japanese could not match. The multiplier was further compounded by the massive logistical advantage in heavy metal support, including readily available 60mm and 81mm mortars, coordinated divisional artillery, and crushing naval gunfire support, assets the Japanese command could only dream of possessing. The terror for the Japanese was that the American fire was not just accurate, it was inescapable. Commanders soon realized that the most fundamental premise of their warfare, the Banzai charge, which depended entirely on exploiting the expected reload pause of a bolt-action rifle, was rendered tactically obsolete. The M1 BAR combination eliminated that pause, transforming the charge from an act of fierce aggression into a predetermined, suicidal massacre. This realization created a strategic catastrophe, forcing the Japanese high command to abandon their cherished offensive doctrine of maneuver and spirit. The painful and decisive reversal required them to adopt the static, defensive strategy of fighting from deep caves and tunnels, a tacit admission that their infantry could not survive in the open against the relentless American volume of fire. While this tactic briefly slowed the American advance, it merely shifted the battlefield into a siege environment, exposing the Japanese to specialized, combined arms like flamethrowers and heavy demolition charges. The M1 Garand, therefore, stands as the ultimate strategic weapon of the Pacific theater. It was the piece of technology that exposed the fundamental flaw in the Japanese system, cementing the new principle that industrial capacity and sustained firepower would henceforth determine the outcome of ground warfare, forever ending the era of the bolt-action rifle and condemning the soldiers of the empire to fight a war their factories had lost.